I'm Stuart Varney.
I'm Harris Faulkner.
I'm Brian Kilmeade, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. I'm Jessica Rosenthal. Is it inevitable that 2024 will simply be a repeat of 2020? Biden versus Trump?
It's a choice between, the incumbent President Joe Biden and what is likely to be the Republican nominee, former President Donald Trump.
As the current president readies a second presidential campaign, voters might not be feeling a rematch.
Look, the Republican primary is going to sort itself out. I'm one who believes it's far from a done deal.
I'm Dave Anthony. Another store is about to be buried in the ever-expanding retail graveyard, Bed Bath & Beyond.
Yeah, they've made so many mistakes over the last decade that their fate has been sealed for a long time.
And I'm Jason Chaffetz. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Over the weekend, it was a who's who of Republican presidential hopefuls, both declared and not yet declared, in Iowa. The first state to hold a Republican presidential nominating contest was the scene of the Iowa Faith and Freedom Coalition gathering. Former President Trump, who has declared, told the crowd in a video statement he would keep his campaign promises.
And I will continue to fight for our values, our faith, and our freedom when we become the very important 47th president of the United States.
He's leading among Republicans in most polling, while Florida Governor Ron DeSantis comes in second. DeSantis was asked about that while meeting with Japan's prime minister in Japan.
I'm not a candidate, so we'll see if and when that changes.
But polling also shows most voters don't want former President Trump to run again. A new AP poll found 70% don't want him to, including 44% of Republicans. An NBC poll recently found 60% don't want him to. However, as President Biden kicks off his campaign this week to run again, that AP poll found 73% don't want him to. The NBC poll found a similar number, 70%. But if he did, the poll found an overwhelming number of Democrats would still support him. This leaves some, like former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, to conclude, as he did on Fox News Sunday.
What America does not want is another repeat of 2020, where we have Joe Biden and Donald Trump running against each other. And so we don't want to repeat that. It takes alternatives.
But one of the recent polls found that among those who did not want to see President Biden run again, nearly half said his age was a major factor. President Biden is currently 80 years old, and he'd been saying he intends to run for several weeks now.
I think, any incumbent president, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, wants to delay this announcement as long as possible. You want the frame to be focused on the presidency itself and not as a presidential candidate, despite being the incumbent.
Kevin Walling was a campaign surrogate for President Biden in 2020.
So we've seen, Obama, Trump, even though he filed his paperwork right after being elected, kind of delay this until the April-May timeline, which I think makes sense. But I think the timing is just right. It's on the 4-year anniversary of his announcement, previously. So I think this just makes sense.
The new NBC News poll finds 70% of adults polled think the president should not run again. And nearly half said that his age played a major factor in their feeling that he shouldn't run again. And I just wonder, as time moves on, none of us is getting any younger. How might concern about age play out over the next 18 months?
Well, it's certainly a legitimate concern, and optics are everything in politics. So I don't fault Americans for having those concerns about the president and his age. And I think what you've seen the president say time and time again is just watch him. So I think this is going to be a grueling campaign, no matter who the Republican nominee is. And, his advice to the American people is to watch him on the campaign trail and to make that decision for themselves. And of course, as he says, more often than not, to take a swig of beer every time he says it, but don't compare him to the almighty, compare him to the alternative. And, elections are about choices and aren't held in a vacuum where you have an idealized version of a candidate. It's a choice between, the incumbent president, Joe Biden, and what is likely to be the Republican nominee, former President Donald Trump.
About that line, when President Biden says, just watch me and watch what I do. The New York Times op-ed quoted him as saying that many times, and then said that he doesn't really give voters a chance to watch him, that he's had very few press conferences or taken questions, from reporters on the fly. Should we expect him to do that more, or is this not the kind of advice this president would follow?
Well, my advice to President Biden all the time is to let Biden be Biden. I think he's best when he's on the stump, when he's fired up, when he is taking questions from reporters, when he is pushing back on different narratives. But, this president maintains a pretty grueling schedule. He's in multiple American cities every week. I harken back to him spending President's Day weekend on that surprise trip to Ukraine, where he spent, I think it was a 7-hour flight both ways and then a 10-hour train ride, all in secrecy, and maintaining that schedule. I'm close friends with a number of his personal aides that say he works extremely hard and keeps a really grueling schedule. And that, of course, will be on display for this campaign, no question.
The president has some challengers. Spiritual author Marianne Williamson, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced last week. Williamson said she's upset the DNC has already said there won't be any debates. I understand that's pretty normal when you have an incumbent. But if polling is correct and if most adults don't want the president to run, do we see a formal Gavin Newsom campaign emerge by this time next year? And if we do, is that because the president has changed his mind on running, or is he still a candidate and he starts to field more challengers?
Yeah, Jessica, it's a really good question. I mean, I think you would have seen Democrats to some degree chomping at the bit a little bit more previous to the midterm elections, right? Sensing some level of vulnerability. Of course, you cite these national polls, and they're important, and they're a snapshot in time about the mood of the country. You have in that same poll a majority of Americans who don't think Donald Trump, for example, should run again for president. So I think he's done a really effective job coming out of the midterms, beating all expectations from an electoral perspective, actually adding a seat in the Senate, only losing a 5-seat majority in the House to the Republicans, the best kind of midterm showing in a century. And I think that's buoyed him and encouraged him and Dr. Biden to really think strongly about running again, given that electoral reality. And the fact that he was right on a lot of the messaging coming into the midterms and talking about extremism within Republican ranks and making it really a choice election. And I think if the president is able to focus on that in 2024, making it a choice election about some of the extreme policies on the right, I think he will do very well and likely be reelected.
But you see Gavin Newsom doing what he does, and he's certainly been more visible on a national scale. Do you think that is part of some effort to raise his profile just in case?
I think it's part of the profile that, in particular, Gavin Newsom has been trying to raise since he was mayor of San Francisco. I think that's more relegated to who Gavin Newsom is as a person, and less so about maybe any kind of political maneuverings that he's thinking through. I mean, he relishes, Governor Newsom, the chance to take on Governor DeSantis and make it that red state, blue state divide with Florida and California. So I think that speaks more volumes about his own personal ambition. But he's going to be a really effective surrogate for the president and his reelection, just as the president was a really effective surrogate during his recall election. And you'll remember he spent a good amount of time in California campaigning for Gavin Newsom against that recall campaign.
So even if Republicans are expecting round 2 of a fight with President Biden, do they look at this as the preferred fight? Or do they view incumbency as a powerful thing to overcome here? Colin Reed is the former campaign manager for Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown and co-founder of South and Hill Strategies.
It's always been a foregone conclusion that the president is going to seek a second term, and for a number of reasons. One being there's just absolutely no one else waiting in the wings of serious viability. Number two, the President Biden has been pretty clear over the last few months that he's going to do this. In terms of where the president starts, it's difficult to imagine an incumbent starting in a much weaker position than President Biden is right now. And it's not just coming from conservatives or Republicans. It's coming from within his own party. There was an AP poll, I believe, over the weekend that said 52% of Democrats don't want him to run again. There was the NBC poll yesterday that said 7 in 10 Americans don't want him to run again. So he starts off very much in a hole with a lot of questions about his viability, fitness for office, and the ability to even withstand the rigors of a campaign.
Now, that said, when you look at the Real Clear Politics average of favorable and unfavorable ratings, President Biden's average unfavorable number is about 11 points higher than his favorable rating. But former President Trump's rating, negative rating, his unfavorable rating is 17 points higher than his favorable rating. So if a matchup were to happen today, what does that signal to you, that President Biden would beat President Trump?
That's always been the basis of a Biden candidacy, both in 2020 and now apparently in 2024, which is he's the only person who can beat former President Trump. And maybe his team is looking at the current polls on the Republican side and concluding that a rematch is inevitable and he's the only one who can stop him. So, look, the Republican primary is going to sort itself out. I'm one who believes it's far from a done deal, and we're still very early on, and the field is still forming, and folks like Governor DeSantis, who's the number two, consistent number two in a lot of these polls, hasn't even announced yet. You've got Ambassador Nikki Haley is making waves and running a strong campaign in the early states. And then you've got people like Governor Chris Christie out there offering potentially an alternative course as well. So the Republican field is far from settled. No doubt the former president has the early and clear momentum, but I think any of these candidates is going to start off with a clear advantage against President Biden, no matter how you slice and dice it.
But given that polling, Colin, indicates that most adults don't want either President Biden or President Trump to run again, maybe more so in President Biden's camp, and maybe that is due to age. But given that most, I guess, voting-aged people in America don't want to see a rematch between these two, if it does boil down to a rematch, is the question, who do independents in swing states dislike less? Or does the question become who else is running, to your point about there's still a lot of time?
Yeah, well, these races are always decided by the swing and independent voters. Whatever happens, it will be a close race. It will come down to a handful of states. But by every demonstrable statistic right now, there's not a lot of goodwill toward the current administration. And usually the party in charge is the one who bears the blame for how people are feeling at that point in time. And that is, if you're on Team Biden, the thing that should be giving them great concern as they kick this thing off. In addition to this criticism about his inability or unwillingness to conduct media interviews. And there have been serious questions about his fitness for office. That trip to Ireland a couple weeks ago, by whatever statistic you want to show, was not helpful. The visual of him stumbling and bumbling, you've got his son Hunter out there, which was inexplicable to many, and it was not good optics. So the president needs to do something. I'm not one who's going to criticize him necessarily for announcing via a video. Lots of other presidents have done that, but this president needs to go out there and show he's up for the job, give a big speech, give a series of interviews, hit the road, do some rallies, and put those questions to rest if he can about his fitness for office.
And Colin, finally, for all the talk of a potential matchup, it seems former President Trump is under the impression that he might have a tougher primary fight before we get to that later stage. And the key challenger, obviously, we see, at least in his eyes, is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and you've noted that. And we see the former president's posts on his own social media platform. There's even a new PAC ad criticizing DeSantis on Social Security and highlighting the differences between him and former President Trump. The poll numbers among Republicans are exceedingly in Trump's favor. So what is he worried about at this stage?
Well, I think President Trump, since his earliest iteration as a candidate back in 2015, has made it pretty clear that his strategy is to obliterate anyone he sees as a threat. Right now, he and his team seem to view Governor DeSantis as the most serious obstacle between him and the nomination. One thing that's interesting to note, Jessica, is the hits that the president's team are deploying against Governor DeSantis right now are largely from the left. He's criticizing Governor DeSantis for keeping the state shut down for too long. He's criticizing Governor DeSantis for trying to reform Social Security and Medicare, allegedly. These are attacks you normally expect from Democrats, not from Republicans. And that's one thing I'd keep an eye on. I noted some of those lines over his rallies over the weekend landed a little bit flat. But the former president, if nothing else, has been unpredictable and certainly marches to the beat of his own political playbook.
Colin Reed, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
This is Jason Chaffetz with your Fox News commentary coming up.
Bed Bath & Beyond is beyond repair. Even after raising money, cutting costs, and closing stores, its stock is worth less than 20 cents. A year ago, that Bed Bath & Beyond stock was $20 a share, $30 in 2021. So the home furnishings giant filed for bankruptcy over the weekend, and Fox's Jonathan Seri reports.
After years of sagging sales, the big box retailer based in Union, New Jersey says it's making the move to implement what it calls an orderly wind down while soliciting interest in sales of some or all of its assets. In the meantime, the company says it will continue to pay employee wages and benefits, and its 360 Bed Bath & Beyond stores, as well as its 120 Bye Bye Baby stores, will remain open.
But not for long. Going out of business, sales are coming.
Yeah, they've made so many mistakes over the last decade that their fate has been sealed for a long time.
Jerry Storch is CEO of Storch Advisors with a long retail career, former CEO of Toys R Us, former CEO of Hudson's Bay, the parent company of Saks Fifth Avenue, and an ex-vice chairman at Target.
Well, the most important mistake is the prior management team made a massive strategic error. They tried to reposition the chain away from what it always has been and should be, which is the authority in the home space, which has like the best brands, everything you could ever want for home, knowledgeable employees, et cetera. They tried to position it as sort of a weaker sister to Target's home department, focusing on own label merchandise and kind of kicking the brands to the curb. Consumers would come to the store and go, "Where's my KitchenAid? Where's my Cuisinart? Where's all the stuff I want?" At Bed Bath & Beyond, and they would say, "Here, buy this other thing instead." And the consumers didn't want anything to do with it. They terminated a lot of employees. They lost their knowledge-based position. So it was hard to go in there and say, "Hey, I need something that does this." And people would just kind of stare at you instead of knowing what the answer was. Visually, they put stickers all over the windows that blocked the view. It looked like a going out of business sale, even when they weren't going out of business. So really, they did just about everything wrong.
When you talk about going out of and de-emphasizing brands, was that trying to save money on supply, trying to get cheaper product into the store? Was that the idea?
No, there's a theory that in this internet era, you have to have product that's not widely available, or else the prices of those products will be bid down to the lowest common denominator. You never make any money. So the idea of having more own labels is not wrong, but the idea of changing over the entire store is dead wrong. And they made massive movements in the private label penetration, and the consumers wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. Meanwhile, you have to keep the brands. The way you play the brands when you are worried about the internet and competition coming and seeing the same product coming and going is you negotiate with your top brands to get exclusive versions of products, and that way they can't find the identical product at a competitor, and that's not what they did. So they really just messed up. The other thing they did, by the way, is when, at absolutely the wrong time, when the stock price had been bid up, because you recall this is one of those meme stocks during the pandemic where the stock price seemed uncorrelated.
Oh, right. Like GameStop and AMC, right? Another one.
Yeah, you could never understand why the stock was so high at a company that wasn't doing that well, but it was. And for some reason, they got in their head that it was a good time to buy back their stock. They actually used a lot of cash that they would dearly love to have right now. They used up a lot of cash to buy back their stock at very inflated prices. And ever since last summer, things have gone from bad to worse in the stores with massive out of stocks. The vendors just gave up on them and were worried about shipping because they thought they'd get stuck with unpaid bills when they went bankrupt. And then the customer deserted them in droves. And so you've had double-digit sales declines during this entire period.
Now, for years, we've all gotten those big postcards in the mail. You get 20% off. You go to Bed Bath & Beyond. They came all the time. You could use them anytime. And Tuesday is the last day you can use these. Did they do well with that? Was that a smart concept?
They did for decades and decades. And I mentioned that the prior management had tried to change to more of an own label focus. One of the other things they did was they said, "Oh, we don't want to be so promotional. Those terrible coupons, we got to get rid of them." And so they cut those out. They cut out a lot of the advertising circulars that were driving traffic. And they thought, "Oh, well, our prices have to mean something. They have to have integrity instead of having those coupons." And that contributed to the crash that took place in the business. And then they've tried to put them back in over the last year or two, but it was kind of too late as the business was already spiraling out of control. It's yet another example. I'd analogize it to what happened at JCPenney, for example, where a new management came in and tried to change too many things at one time.
I remember Linens and Things, Pier 1, these stores that were in the home section. What about the ones like Home Goods? Does West Elm, is Pottery Barn, do these stores still have futures?
I think they do because they have a clear positioning. So most of the business in the home area has gone to Walmart and Target and Amazon, these big behemoths that have taken a lot of the center of the plate type of products. But some other companies can still do well. Home Space is massive. So, for example, you mentioned Home Goods. That's a division of TJX. The same people who run the TJ Maxx store. So it's a value off-price concept. And so there's always room for value. And they're doing pretty well from what I've seen and heard. West Elm or Williams, all these other companies are positioned, against a certain segment, whether it's luxury product or stylish, contemporary, kind of segments of the market. They're not trying to be anywhere near as big as Bed Bath & Beyond was at its peak, but they stand for something, whether it's value or style or a particular type of style in home. And you have IKEA. You have so many people doing well in home today that it's not like the home category is some kind of a bad category. It's just that Bed Bath & Beyond lost its relevance, tried to change into something it simply was never going to be and never should be, which, like I said, is kind of this weaker version of Target's home department. And in the process, they fired their customers.
But that's so hard, isn't it, Jerry? Toys R Us, gone in that sector. Circuit City, gone in that sector. Sports Authority, gone. So many within categories that were big names are gone.
Look, companies perish if they are not providing, current relevance to their customers. And so you name examples of companies that stopped innovating and lost their way. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible. Retailing is a tough business. Let's face it. You face a number of very large competitors who operate at low margin rates. But having said that, there's also great opportunity in retailing if you do a good job, you execute, if you stand for something special and meaningful to your customers, they will keep coming back.
I didn't even mention Sears. You mentioned JCPenney, Lord & Taylor, all these big name department stores. We've talked before, as we get into Christmas time about department stores. Macy's, where is it in the retail landscape right now?
Well, they have been resilient in the sense that they're not in any financial trouble by a long shot. They've done well there. They continue to work hard in the system space to manage their inventory well. They've done a number of very good things, but I feel like they're facing a losing battle over the long term. So they just aren't distinctive enough to appeal to today's customer. A lot of their customers are older customers who just like department stores from the past, but they will fade out. And so I think they face, along with the other department store companies like Nordstrom or others, or Belk or whoever, they face a very difficult future, and they're certainly losing massive market share.
What about malls? I mean, they've always constantly trying to rearrange and rethink how they operate without as many department stores, without a Bed Bath & Beyond, without all of these things. They're trying hard to go with experience and all these, places to go, or like almost like an amusement park kind of thing. Are they going to succeed?
Well, malls are much more flexible than a single retailer. If you think about it, what they can do is simply replace the irrelevant retailers with contemporary and relevant ones. And so the best operators, like let's take Simon, for example, are really good at this. It is very difficult in the B and C malls. I think most of those don't have a very bright future. A lot of them are closing down and are being what we call demalled, which is where they tear them all down and build a bunch of strip centers or grocery stores or whatever.
But we as shoppers do more and more online, don't we? At some point, are we going to have just a lot of empty strip malls over time?
Well, we already do, and we're going to continue to have a lot of space that is being converted into other uses. Services continue to grow, and so you certainly can have room for more restaurants, more insurance offices, more doctors' offices, or places to get MRIs or dialysis or whatever. So I don't know if we're have an excess of space as much as it's misallocated to uses of the past. So they will change over. There's no doubt about that. And again, the poorer malls in the country are in horrible shape. Many are closed or derelict or have been torn down, and that I think we're going to see. But that doesn't mean that the A malls face a similar fate. People love to go out. They love to get together, particularly in a post-pandemic era. No one wants to sit around at home anymore. And so where are you going to go? And that's a pretty cool place to go, if the developer has refreshed it.
So back to Bed Bath & Beyond. They're in the process of trying to sell off assets, maybe even trying to buy, or that's possible. They could find someone that wants to operate the stores. But is it, I mean, I've read that they're trying. Is there a chance anyone takes over and the stores stay open?
I don't think there's much of a chance. I don't think there's a chance for the mainstream Bed Bath & Beyond business. There might be a small outside chance in the Buy Baby business because there's not a single national baby chain left. And so there's an opportunity there maybe for someone to pick that up and try to be the authority in the baby space. The names, of course, someone will buy, like they buy every name. You know, there are these intellectual property companies, licensing companies. They'll buy Bed Bath & Beyond, they'll buy Baby. They may even open a store or two and claim, look, they're back and all that, or a store within a store, the way Toys R Us has stores open at Macy's. But the only link to the past is the name, not the company itself. It's a distant sort of memory or shadow of its former self.
Will consumers get good deals going into these going out of business sales that'll be going on?
Well, the liquidators are really smart and not giving anything away for anything more than they have to. And so you might find some good deals. You're also going to find that what they do is they start with lower discounts at the beginning, and they work their way down. And that way, the stuff that's the best sells first at a lower discount, and they increase the discounts as the dregs of the liquidation sale are taking place. Then they bring in product from the outside. Before long, they'll be selling Oriental rugs in the Bed Bath & Beyond stores during liquidation. Who knows what they'll sell to try to get customers excited by the value environment of the going out of business sale to get excited and buy stuff. But I would say it's fun to shop. My opinion, going out of business sale, but do you get good bargains compared to what similar merchandise is available in the market as a whole? Probably not.
Jerry Storch, CEO of Storch Advisors, former CEO for Toys R Us in Hudson's Bay, former vice chair of Target. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Put the power of over 100 meteorologists and the worldwide resources of Fox in your hands with the Fox Weather Podcast. Precise, personal, powerful. Subscribe and listen now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Jason Chaffetz.
What's on your mind?
Did you know we have an all-domain anomaly resolution office, AARO? I didn't, and I used to be the chairman of the House Oversight Committee. Well, the Department of the Defense has been tracking so-called UFOs. There have been 650 sightings over the course of time. I was actually glad to know that the Pentagon has actually been tracking these. For only the second time in more than 50 years, the United States Senate actually had a hearing on UFOs last week. And one of the scary things that they came up with was an unresolved UAP, an unidentified anomalous phenomena, which happened over Southeast Asia. And in the video, you can see something that has no explanation. It's curious at best. Is it an alien? Probably not, maybe not, but they don't know. Is it another adversary, perhaps China or Russia, testing some equipment or using it in a potential battlefield? We don't yet know. And yet, these phenomena are out there. Most can be explained away as weather balloons or some other phenomena, but many of them cannot be. So what is it? It's this type of curiosity that I think we have to pursue. As a nation, we do not know the answers to all of these questions. And yet we have a duty and responsibility if we're going to be the world's superpower, if we're going to protect the homeland of the United States of America, if we're going to protect the greatest Air Force and Sea Force the nation and the world has ever seen. We need to pursue these. What's interesting about this particular phenomenon is that there is no explanation. And yet our best experts can see no trail behind this fast-moving UFO. No propulsion that is immediately evident. And yet it's flying around some of our Air Force personnel. Quote, are they attached to a national security area? Does it show some anomalous phenomenon that's of interest? If it's just a spherical thing that's just floating around with the wind and has no payload, that's less important than something with a payload on it. And that's less important than something that's maneuvering. That was a quote from the person that testified at the hearing. The person who leads this effort is Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. He is the director, and he is reporting to the Senate Armed Services, and I think it's of something that is of keen interest to so many Americans. Let's find out what it is, because quite frankly, we really don't know. I'm Jason Chaffetz with this Fox News Rundown. I'm the Fox News contributor and the host of the Jason in the House podcast.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. And now, stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. Listen ad-free on Fox News Podcasts Plus on Apple Podcasts. And Prime members can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.